that happened. So with the children, so I got the bright idea. The kids were coming over on Christmas afternoon, so I got this idea that I would tell Abby something, and here's why. Tracy had told me that the children, our two children, their spouse would get less gifts this year, okay? Which I took it to mean there was going to be overall less expenditures and less gifts. What I didn't realize, it was just actually a reallocation of funds to the grandchildren, and there was actually allocation of funds taken from other places and brought in. So we did not have a net result of less, it was more. But I thought, well, I'm going to buffer this a little bit. I'll call Abby and tell her, and I knew she'd get the word to the others, that the parents, the adults would have less gifts this year. So I called her on the morning of Christmas Day and said, Abby, FaceTimed her actually. I said, Abby, Santa Claus came to our house. Oh, he brought you lots of gifts, okay? We talked about that just a little bit, and then I don't know where it came all of a sudden. It's like these ad libs you shouldn't do. I said, but guess who else came? The Grinch came. Oh my goodness. You talk about getting the child's attention, the Grinch. I said, but wait, he didn't take any of your gifts. He just took some of the adult gifts, like your parents and auntie and uncle. So in the background, I mean, she leaves the phone and she's telling, the Grinch came, and just goes berserk about it. Not that Santa came, but about the Grinch. And this is what happens when you lie. It never ends, because all of a sudden she came back. She said, what about Max the dog? My mind is going, wait a minute. For a minute, I couldn't even think who Max the dog was. And then it was the devil on my side because I was lying. But he went ahead and said, he helped me remember that Max the dog was the Grinch's dog. And I said, well, Tracy's cat, which is named Masha, said, Masha chased Max the dog off. And she'd come back to the phone. I said, I took care of the Grinch. He didn't get your gifts because I gave him onion. You know the Grinch likes onions, right? So that was kind of satisfying that, and it went along pretty good, I thought, except I'm telling you, Colin said she could not quit talking about the Grinch. We got off the phone. I thought, I'm going to text her one more thing. You know, again, the devil's got a hold of me. So I said, when you come up, you maybe see onions, because I gave him a bag of onions so he'd give back some of those gifts. And so outside, I took an onion bag, and I put it out on the porch, and I put like 4 onions scattered out. Well, when she came up, that got it all started again. So, again, when you start with a lie, this is a spiritual application, Kevin, so you know I'm doing something biblical. It does not ever end, does it? In fact, I've already had to start praying, please let me make it to about during the 2nd or 3rd grade so I can repent of my sin of lying. You get what I'm talking about? Okay. All right. The other thing that happened is, so Tracy loves our house back in order immediately. I mean, when Christmas is over, it's over at our house, and we start taking things down. So I got up on Friday morning, and I knew this was the case. She already had some things in bins. I told you before, we have bins up in the storage. And so she had gotten like a 2 or 3 bin lead on me. And so I went down, and the first thing she said was, oh, you just going over to the pond. She knows I want to go to the pond and work at our pond and get rid of some debris and trees still left from the tornado. I said, no, I'm going to help you. I'd already thought, I did want to help her, but also I thought, I'm going to be in a bad mood if I come in at 5 o'clock from the pond, and there's almost 50 bins now. It's got to go upstairs. So I thought, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay and help her. So when I said I was going to stay, you should have seen the panic in her eyes. She started, trying to get ahead of me, because if I get caught up with her, I start helping her put things in bins. That's not good. So I got those up and came down and realized she didn't have much going. So I thought, well, I will help. I can get the candles down. We have over 3 dozen candles that are in our windows between the barn, the house, and the pool house. She was okay with that. How bad can I mess that up? So I'm pretty smart. I go get a Rubbermaid bin, and I go around each room, and I put them in. I get the house done. I get the ladder and get the tall ones up out of the windows. And I go to the barn. The 6 windows there are easy. And then I said, well, I'm going to go to the pool house and get those 4. She never said a word, okay? I'm thinking 5 minutes, I'll be done with this. I go over there. Everything that we stored in that pool house for the winter was in front of those windows. I started trying to crawl across. I couldn't get to them, so I had to take everything out, move them out of the way so I could get to the candles. And I'm thinking, I cannot believe, did I put these in after we put those candles in? So after 20 minutes or more, I get back in the house. I knew she had a smirk on her face. And I started telling her about that. She said, I climbed across them. Well, she's lightweight and she could. So she knew going out there that it wasn't going to be a 5-minute job. She let me go out knowing it was going to be 20 minutes. So we continue on through the morning, and we work it hard. At one point, she asked me what I was breathing. I was literally breathing. I said, well, hey, this is like a marathon. And so I was breathing hard. I wasn't going to the hospital. I was just breathing hard. We don't even stop. Like, you go by the aid stations and get stuff quickly out of the refrigerator and continue on. It's that hard of a escapade. Multiple times she kept saying, why don't you just go on over to the pond and work? And so we went a little longer. And I thought, well, I'm going to head over. I'm going to go outside and get this Santa out off of the back porch. You have to put it in styrofoam, wrap it up, put it upstairs. And when I go out to get another thing, there's a little plastic round piece, and I bring it in plus another thing, and I said, that must go to the Santa. She said, yeah, that covers up the batteries. Oh, man, the batteries. I go up there and cut it apart, get that off. She lost confidence from that point on, because then she asked, what about, did you take the batteries out of the other thing outside? That was a rhetorical question. No, I hadn't. So we're going along. We get into the middle of the afternoon, and I'm going to get to the lesson. And she was upstairs. I had all those candles in one room I'd put because she wanted to take them out and put them in a box. And all of a sudden I heard the question, you did turn all those candles off, didn't you? Again, rhetorical question. This was in the afternoon. And about the time she said that, I looked up because I was downstairs at the aid station, and I looked up, and there was this illumination coming from that one room. No, I did not take them out. I thought she would turn them off and take the batteries out when she put them in the box. So at this point, this is late, middle afternoon, I thought, for the sake of our marriage, I'm going over to the pond. And so I spent the rest of the afternoon at the pond. So again, spiritual application. There are times when you need separation from your spouse, not on a permanent basis, but a few hours at a time. She needed relief, and I didn't want to be put in the hospital. So, all right. Let's get seriously on, because, again, this is for the purpose of helping us as Christians. And so we're in the Old Testament. You remember we call it Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. We're ready today for Numbers. Did you know that the title of Numbers is not the original titling of the book of Numbers? I like that book, that name, because it helps me. What does it remind us of? Come on, what does Numbers remind us of? A specific number. You don't have to tell me the number, but what it's about. Why do we have it called the Numbers? Who's going to get numbered? Israelite nation. And that's where we get this idea of there's something over 600,000 fighting men, and you do this extrapolation to the number of people that could possibly be. In the original, in the Hebrew, depending on who you read, it was either called the wanderings or the wilderness wanderings, because really, in the book of Numbers, that's what you have them doing. What? Wandering around in the wilderness. Do you remember who is the leader still during the book of Numbers? What great man? Moses. We're in his last 40 years, remember, of his life. And so in the book of Numbers, the events here, just so you know, most of the events are right at the beginning of the wilderness wanderings or at the very end. Okay? Easy concept. The other 37, 38, 39 years, however you want to count it, there's only a couple events that are recorded. So the book of Numbers, if you're trying to understand it, it's the Israelite nation right at the beginning of that 40-year period, and the other part of it, almost all of it, is at the very end. In between, there are a couple of events, but for the most part, and some commentaries would say that the last is at the 38th year, and some will say at the 40th year. I'm not going to get into all that. It's just right towards the end or right towards the beginning. Is that okay? So we've done Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, written by whom? Who was the writer of those? So I know you're with me. Moses. And who's going to write Numbers? Moses. Okay, and he's going to do one other book. Pentateuch. Important to the Jewish people. I'm going to refer some to the book that I told you about. See if I can get here. Because there are some neat little points he makes. I don't want to just... When you read Numbers, you can look at it on the negative side. It's so terrible to see what the Israelite nation does to cause them to not get to go immediately into Canaan, right? That's terrible. When you say so, Anthony? But the flip side of it is that God is still going to carry on his promise with Abraham. Going to be through another generation. But that promise is still going to be there. I like that. So on the one hand, very negative. On the other hand, there's still this avenue of or the thread, so to speak, of God's promise. Okay? Look at Numbers chapter 1. You there? Verse 1, And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they come out of the land of Egypt, saying, if I understand right, this is the 13th month. I think that's what that's meaning, after the Exodus, leaving Egypt. And he says in verse 2, Take ye the sum of all the congregations of the children of Israel, after their families, by the house of their fathers, with the number of their names, every male by their polls. Verse 3, From 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel. Now, I do not know the exact time on when this is. I will tell you, I don't think I brought it up last week in Leviticus with the priest. The idea was when a man got into his 50s, at some point, he was to give up some of those duties. So I don't know if that carried along to this same concept that a man to somewhere in his 50s was able to go to war. I don't know. I tend to look at this, and really some people say there's only a couple million Israelites. In my mind, when you take this number, I really think it's closer to maybe even as much as 5 million, but 3, 4, 5 million, not just a couple million, because we're only talking about those that are willing to go to war. And that does not include which tribe, do you know? Not even counting the Levites, okay? So if you went through this, I've written it in my Bible, like in verse 31, 57,400. For Issachar up above, 54,400. I just did that one time because I wanted to quickly be able to see what the number is. Verse 37, 35,400 of the tribe of Benjamin, okay? So I think it's pretty neat. At the end, at verse 46, I've written 603,550 Levites not numbered. Now that's the way I did it. Okay? Look at chapter 3. I would have said this before when we studied Numbers for those of you here. Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord when they offered strange fire. Hey, I don't know why it just popped in my mind. Did you know we have somebody that was recognized this week in our audience? Miss Allison, doctor. This is one thing I like about Allison most of all. I forget she's a doctor. That is such a great thing when somebody has that much knowledge, that recognized, and yet we forget she is a doctor. So she was recognized by the hospital because somebody put her name forth that she'd had great bedside manners, the way she treated somebody. I thought that was fantastic. And see, it doesn't surprise me that Allison got that award, and it doesn't surprise me that a Christian is recognized as having a good bedside manner and nice and polite and doesn't act all uppity. Thank you for being that way. I really appreciate that. I believe that's the way we should all be. Okay? So anyway, getting back to Nadab and Abihu, it's not because her children are as bad. I don't know what made me think of her at this point, but Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire before the Lord, okay? Pretty ornery. Sometimes you act like Randy is. I cannot imagine Smiling Rosie being ornery, but okay. By your look on your face, it's about like, that's the kind of look I saw from my wife multiple times we were taking down the ornaments and saying, that is exactly the face I saw. I'm telling you. Now say that louder. They just hand out those faces when you get married. Oh. That was pretty. If you didn't hear, she said they hand out those faces when you get married. A woman gets these different faces when she marries. I kind of think that when you get married, the Lord is preparing you, with that husband, he's preparing you for raising children down the line, okay? If you can survive that. All right, so Nadab and Abihu, the point from this in chapter 3 is what? Can we do things our way? Is it okay just to do it our way? And this carries over into the New Testament. And so Anthony's preaching a lot right now. And over, why do you preach? You preach because you want people to know God's way, the Lord's way. It doesn't matter what Jason's way is or Anthony's way. It's what the Lord says. And this always sticks with me. Nadab and Abihu, they offered a fire before the Lord. Would you agree? They performed their priestly duties in their mind. But it wasn't the Lord's way. I don't know how you can overemphasize the fact that when we do things, it needs to be the Lord's way. Okay? Anybody got any thoughts as we go along? Chapter 3, verse 40, I've labeled 22,000 Levites because 39 said that, so I put between 39 and 40. And then the redemption of the firstborn, beginning in verse 43, you might read up on that about the firstborn males consecrated to the Lord. I don't understand all the implications. I think I understand some of it, but you study on your own. Some of this reminds me of Leviticus chapter 5, like cleansing of the camp. Keep moving on. We got to cover a lot. If you're not turning over your Bibles with me, you're making a mistake, because I want to get further along. Now, this is where it is about the age of the Levites. I got it in the wrong area. Look at chapter 8. This was what I referred to, and I got it in the wrong. It was not Leviticus. It's here in Numbers. Chapter 8, verse 23. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, This is it that belongeth unto the Levites. From 20 and 5 years old and upward, they shall go in and wait until the congregation, service the tabernacle of the congregation. Look at verse 25. From the age of 50 years, they shall cease waiting upon the service thereof and shall serve no more. So I put in my notes from 25 to 50 years of age. I don't want to extrapolate things out. People could take this and say, well, in the church, you just retire of doing things. No. Look at verse 26. To think that you just are done, verse 26, but shall minister with their brethren in the tabernacle of the congregation to keep the charge, and shall do no service thou to unto the Levites touching their charge. So it's like there's a change in roles, I believe, is a better way we should look at that. And so you and I, as more mature here, many of us, I don't want you to look at this and get the idea, well, I get to retire at 50, or I can't do anything until I'm 25. There are different roles in life. I believe that's the way you should look at it. I'm confident about that because when I look at the New Testament, I see young people. We don't know the age of Timothy. I think he's probably a little older than some of us think at times, but we see Timothy and we know at a young age he was able to do things. And we see, when did John quit writing? Well, it appears about right at the time of his death. And we know he's a mature man. Am I right? Kevin, you want to argue with me on that? John wrote, we know in Revelation, and some of those, when it was in the 80s, 90s probably. And we know if he was, relatively speaking, close to the age, somewhere close to the age of Christ. At the very least, he was in his upper 70s, 80s, or 90s, probably writing books to us, right? Doesn't sound like that you just quit doing things in church. So right now, if you're sitting here thinking, well, I've done my time, I've served my time, I find that in Numbers, I would argue with you, go to the New Testament and see what people did. You do things in your life. There are different roles depending on your age. There are things I don't do now that I would have done or could have done when I was in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. But I tell you what, I sure worked a lot at the pond the last couple of days. Again, one thing was to save my marriage, but the other is because things need to be done, and I knew I could do it. I tried to do it in a smarter way, not the Kevin Fortner way. I tried to watch with the tractor and be careful. I tried to remember with the change, and have eye protection on, Kevin. I had eye protection on. When I got over and realized I didn't have eye protection, I called my son and asked him to go get my safety glasses. I didn't even have to put in there at the bottom because I don't want to be like Kevin Fortner. He knew what I meant, okay? Wear eye goggles. Be protected, okay? So different times of your life, you'll do different things. Go ahead. All right, read it for us. Anthony's got a booming voice.
It talks about the whole chapter.
Okay. Oh.
But he talks about how the interaction between the two age groups is there, and the purpose of the church is helping the old people. The older people have a responsibility to the young people, and the young people have a responsibility to the old people too, to learn from them.
To listen.
Listen, and I don't want to say admire, but learn from their faithfulness. Because you've had hard times, everybody in this room's had hard times, probably wanted to quit kind of do. We're still here.
That's right. Perseverance. And so you've said that. Learning from those. Sometimes I think I don't feel like coming here. And there are things like Gene Baldwin, for those of you who recognize. Gene Baldwin never missed. He and Andy were here, so that was a good example. I learned from them. They taught me. When you ladies are here, even though you don't feel like it, that teaches me. Okay? So.
Because we all know a mom. We've all had our lives fuss with the kid in the nursery. It's not even worth going to church because they ain't hear nothing. I'm sure your wife, my wife.
Oh, absolutely.
But they're still here.
Still come along.
And that's to be commended to them too.
Well, I like the fact that Paul, when he's talking not just to Titus but to Timothy, he's instructing him to be ready to preach at all times, understanding that Paul wasn't saying, you wait till I get there and I'll preach, did he? He was telling Timothy as a younger man to be ready to preach. So, come on, guys. I don't believe that you and I should retire from church work, being a Christian, until we are put in the grave. Now, Tom Payne, he's retired from it. But I believe as long as we have any ability whatsoever, you keep chugging along, keep doing it. All right. Yes, Al. Yes.
You'll also note the Levites were not counted
Not counted. That's correct.
because they were not part of the physical soldiers.
That's right.
But for instance, taking the city of Jericho, the priests marched with the ark. So just because you're not counted in the number doesn't mean that they weren't important and involved. I supporting their,
Supporting.
yes.
That's right. So how can we apply that today? So we will talk about how important it is for Chris and Tyler and the work they do up here. And we'll talk about how important it is for the 4 men who lead us as elders. But are they doing it on their own? Absolutely not. Kevin, there is not an elder that can be a great elder if his wife's not assisting him, right? If she's not helping him. And it's very difficult. It can be done. Paul did it. It can be done. You can be a minister without a wife, but I'll tell you, that wife can make or break that preacher. And we've seen it both directions. All right. Chapter 10, that little thing about the silver trumpets. Chapter 11, and when the people complained, it displeased the Lord. And the Lord heard it. I love this next statement because it makes me understand more about the Lord. And his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them, and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. I told you I read the Old Testament so I can get a glimpse of the Lord. He's going to end up sending quail to sustain the people, to help them, to make sure his covenant goes on. But did he invoke any punishment? Does the Lord ever get angry? Having compassion, Lord God the Father. But they completely ignore verses like this throughout the Bible that talks about the Lord getting angry. We are made in his image in that some of these emotions we feel, or these emotions we feel, where do they come from? I talked about it last week. Our elders here have a right, when it is justified, to be angry with us, to be mad at us, to be disappointed in us. His anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them. We're going to see that multiple times if you follow with me all through the Old Testament, how many times he chastises to the point even of death. We're going to see here in just a moment with somebody's rebellion. What's thought about that? What do you think about that? Isn't it easy, and don't you want to accept what people are talking about when they say the Lord is so kind, and they always bring up Jesus and the woman at the well and how he didn't, cast stones at her, but they completely fail to acknowledge that he said, don't do it anymore. And I bring this up over and over in my life, and I try to bring it up here over and over, that there is this balancing act. For the Lord to be just, right? It's a balancing act. There will be people put to eternal death. I don't want to be one of those. I don't want you to be. I don't want my children, my grandchildren to be. But that's why we study. Why we listen. That's why we look at this. I want to be reminded, Jason, the Lord can and is angry with me when I don't obey him, when I complain, when I murmur. He had brought them out. He had already proven to them he would provide, and here they go complaining. Now, what are you and I going to do today? How many of us won't complain about something? Come on. I was trying to help my wife, and she was still complaining. You're trying to do something great, and somebody complaining.
Look what they were complaining about. They were complaining about what they were being fed. If you look at verse 6 and 7 of that same chapter, all we had to eat is this manna. All we had to eat is the gospel. The gospel, if you look at verses 7 and 8, it's sweet, it's refreshing. If you look at verse 8, they gathered it and they ground it in the mills, and they feed it in the mortar, they bake it in the pans. I don't know much about cooking. I know a little bit about smoking meat, not smoked meat.
Smoked meat, not smoking.
But I don't know much about
So,
What do we do with the Word of God? It affects every aspect of our lives. It doesn't say anything about Facebook per se, but the application's there to the Word of God.
okay.
All Scripture. I'm still in your class, sorry. All
You
Scripture-
preach today, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All Scripture is given by inspiration.
He's getting wound up.
I am, sorry.
But one of the things, I do the Lord's Supper this morning. One of the things I want to try to get across in is, though, also the simplicity. This was very simple with the manna, very simple with the quail, the simplicity. And we have to watch if we make things too hard, too complex. Man has to, so, all right. Chapter 12, even Moses' family gets a hard on him, Miriam and Abram, because he took a Ethiopian wife, and we find out that the Lord did not like it when they were hard on him. In verse 3 says, now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. That's one of the best. I love that statement about Moses. Sometimes if I didn't have this, I'd wonder about, did he have an ego? Because we always talk about him striking the rock when he wasn't supposed to. Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. That's a great verse. Now mine is in parentheses, and so that always worries me, because sometimes that means there's a possibility of things being added in down the line, but that is such a great thing. And the Lord spake suddenly to Moses and to Aaron and to Miriam, come out ye three out of the tabernacle. Okay? And we're going to find in verse that these following verses that Miriam has leprosy. You know, the Lord was upset with them. I got to keep moving along. Can't spin long this. He proved to everybody that Moses is the one that he is proud of, that he wants to be leading them. Chapter 13, what happens here? Just so I know you're with me. Chapter 13, what's going to happen in this verse? This chapter. What is it? Spies. The 12 spies representing each tribe are going to be sent into the land of Canaan. They're going to go out and spy it out. And verse 26, I have it labeled in my Bible, it's the report of the spies. How did they come back and what did they say? Can we do this? Verse 31, but the men that went up with him said, now this is after Caleb and Joseph had said something, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. So 10 men, not Joshua and Caleb, say we can't do it. And Joshua and Caleb have been trying to implore them that, hey, we have the Lord on our side. And the point I tried to make when we did Numbers before, and I want to tell you again, is we find out because the Lord is so upset, he makes them wander for the next 40 years. He makes all this older generation die off. Are we in agreement? And the point I try to think about that I even learned from this is, out of all these hundreds and hundreds of thousands of responsible adults, my mind at least can't picture every one of them saying, let's don't do it. I picture a lot of these adults being complacent. Is that okay to say? I don't say they were like these 10 just saying we can't do it. Not every one of them. I think there were some just sitting back there on their haunches, just kind of going along with the crowd. Are you okay with that? But those responsible adults that could have said something, should have done something, stood up for the Lord and did nothing. What happened to them in the next 40 years? They died, didn't they? They had, in a sense, the same penalty as those 10 men. Now, they didn't die as quickly as those 10, but they died. And so this is one of those things I try to apply in my life. Jason, being complacent in the eyes of the Lord, when something is evil and you're complacent to it, is held against me. I'm convinced of that. To be complacent, to just go along with the crowd. I may not be the one holding up the dagger or the gun and going to shoot somebody, but being complacent to it, the Lord held these people accountable. We know that the day of judgment is going to surprise people, because in the judging of the nations, when you find that in the Gospels, it says there are going to even be people that said, did I not prophesy in thy name, Lord? And yet they're going to be what? Sent to hell. And that's people that even thought they were doing good. You and I have to watch. We sit here and we're complacent, and we think we're okay because we didn't do the evil deed, but we're allowing it to happen on our watch. As an elder, don't you worry about that, Kevin? You worry about, am I allowing something to take place that shouldn't? That's one of those things the elders have to watch for. The Lord doesn't like it when you and I don't stand up for what we know to be right. He expected at the point in the New Testament that Christians died in the arena, didn't they? Christians died in the arena because they wouldn't give up their faith. They wouldn't go along and say that they denounced Christ. Now, what do you think about that? And you and I sometimes feel okay. We're sitting here in our pews. We think we're okay. But we go out in the world and we're complacent. I don't feel good about it. I try to remind myself, Jason, did you stand up for what you know to be right? How do we balance this out? Turning the other cheek, as we say, but yet not going along with evil. Isn't it something we struggle with in our lives? Don't you struggle with it? I do. At what point are we okay with that? But all these people died, even though they weren't the 10 that were saying that. The death of the 10 is recorded here in chapter 14. They died by the plague before the Lord, it says in verse 37. Okay. Chapter 16, anybody got that labeled in Numbers? Whose rebellion? Korah thought highly of himself, didn't he? Or thought less of Moses. And in verse 2 it says, the 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown, they all got together and said, hey, we don't have to do what Moses says. Who is he? And we find out here, and this is one of the things that's not in this period of time. It's at a different time. For some reason or another, I'm thinking it was 10 or 15 years in. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, this was an event that took place not at the very beginning of the wandering and not at the very end. And we know in this passage in verse 35 of chapter 16, there came a fire from the Lord and consumed the 250 men that offered incense. You think that got people's attention? You think it got their attention in verse 27 of this same passage, so that they gathered up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, these three biggest of all that was in charge, on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the door of their tents, and their wives and their sons and their little children. And the Lord said, you better get away from these. What happened to them in verse 30? Including these little children, not just the men that did it, but what happened? Earth opened up and swallowed them. Does it sound like it only got the men responsible? Did it take anybody else with them? Got kids and stuff. And that's hard. I don't have all the answers. I still go back to when Mother and Dad were in that wreck years ago, and I may have mentioned this when we studied Numbers. And Mother and Dad and the group from Northside that was in our van, they were innocent. Didn't do anything bad. And yet they were hit head on. And because of that, lives were impacted. Mother died early because of that. So I don't get it all. I don't understand it. I do not understand why innocent people sometimes die because of the actions of others, but that's the facts. That's the way I look at it. I don't overthink it. I just accept it. I hope you do too, that I cannot help it. I do not know all of God's plan. But yes, there are sometimes you're innocent and you still suffer because of the acts of others. Just life, okay? Anybody got any explanation? I don't think on it a whole lot. I'm not going to dwell on it a lot. I just accept it because you can get your mind going down this path, and that's why some people think there's not a God because, how do they live? I'm not getting into that. It's beyond my mentality. Aaron's rod in chapter 17 is another one of those things that's not in the 40-year period. We don't have time. Man, are we running fast. Chapter 20 is Miriam's death. Okay? And chapter 20 is also the one that ultimately, in a sense, takes Moses' life early, doesn't it? Because in chapter 20, verse 8, the Lord says, take the rod and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes. And it shall give forth this water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. People have been complaining again, they need water. They're complaining the whole time. That's the thing I hadn't talked about a lot because we're going to hear it so much in other books. In verse 10, Moses is so irritated at the people. You have to realize somebody can prod you to the point of doing wrong, the point of being mad. And I'm telling you, I'm not just joking about this. I truly left the house the other day because I knew I was prodding Tracy to the point she was getting frustrated. Why push her over the edge? Well, the people pushed Moses over the edge. And so what's interesting here is Moses did this, and in a sense you can attribute him doing it because of the children of Israel. They almost made him sin, if you will. But did that cause him to not be accountable? No. He was still held accountable. So Moses says, "Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock?" Which meant he was taking upon himself, this mild man, this man that was among the meekest that's ever lived, was pushed to the point by people that made him do something, and he smote the rock twice. And verse 12, immediately he finds out, God says, "You shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them." And people think the Lord will not punish people. Moses, I would love on the day of judgment to trade places with Moses. I really would. I would take my chance, wouldn't you? You wouldn't? Why not?
Because of the blood of Jesus Christ, I get to know the church.
Oh, okay. I'm saying I would take his place on the day of judgment. I would take my chances going to heaven, is what I meant by it, Anthony. Yes. Yes, that's what I meant. No, I don't want to be in his position here and have to lead all these grumbling, mumbling people, right? No, I meant on the day of judgment, if Jason could get to go to heaven based on Moses, I would love that. Man, I'd take that in a heartbeat. No, I do not want to lead those grumbling people, right? I've been at work with just a few people that grumble occasionally. I don't want to take 2 or 3, 4, 5 million. So, no. So we have that, and he does not get to go into, we know he sees the promised land. We're going to see that later, but he doesn't get to go in. The one point I didn't get across in here, did you realize after the 10 spies and people were told they won't get to go in, they were going to have to wander in the wilderness? I forgot to bring this up. You know, they thought they were going to take Canaan by themselves. I didn't bring that point up. They thought they'd go into the land of Canaan on their own, and the Lord wasn't on their side. And even with this great countenance, this great number of people, were they successful? No. The point there is, hey, the Lord's on your side, you can do anything. The Lord's against you, ultimately, you will lose. There are going to be people on the day of judgment found out the Lord wasn't on their side. They're going to lose. They may have thought they won. So I failed to bring that up. And in chapter 26, we have the numbering again. And the point I try to remind myself here is the number is almost identical. It's so close to what it was before. That these 40 years were just keeping it evened out. Not letting the children of Israel grow like they had for the 400 years or so in Egypt. It was not a time of seeing increase. It was just like a time you could just do away with in your life. Wouldn't it be terrible? For 40 years you just wandered in the wilderness with no real purpose? Isn't that what it is? Well, when you are not on God's side, when you fail to go by his rules, his commandments, and these people didn't do it. And so they wasted away their life. Is that all right to say it that way? Lots of people, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, wasted away in the wilderness because they had chosen not to stand up for the Lord. All right, so next week we'll continue along, and we're going to really be covering some faster from here on out. Thank you, guys.